Yo! Welcome to Gordo and the F Words, a podcast where we talk about things that start with F words. And by that, I mean sometimes things that we should talk about when we don't, and we just give space to them and talk about them. Today I'm talking about fiction books, the Dune series, the Dune books. I would probably, put in like a song from the movie, but I don't know if I can get copyrighted or if anyone cares. And spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about a bunch of things from the books. If you are planning to read the books and you have not because you like the movies, spoiler alert, don't listen to this episode. Go do something else. Listen to a different one because I am going to talk about a lot of stuff that you're probably just going to spoil books. I just have always wanted to read the whole series. And after the movies came out this year, I was really felt inclined to read them. And so so I just wanted to read the books and see where Frank brings the story arc, see what happens. I read the first 3 a couple years ago, but I didn't get through all of them. And this year I was committed. I thought I want to get through all of these books here and see what's here. So that's what I do. And after the podcast, let me know what you think. I'm curious other people's thoughts on these books. I think they're worth reading. If you like the movie and you want to see where it comes from, where the story's going to go, it's worth reading and seeing. They're a bit jarring at times, but I think it's because Frank really is trying to communicate philosophies and ideas with his stories, and I really find it challenging and enjoyable. So definitely give them a read and let me know what you think. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the episode. All right. Welcome back to the F Words with Gordo. I'm your host, Gordo. Thanks for tuning in. And today, guys, I want to talk about, I accomplished something I'm very proud of. I read all, not 1, not 3, all 6 of Frank Herbert's Dune books. The movies came out earlier this year were based on the first of his 6 books. And he wrote 6 more. And I tried reading a couple of years ago, got through the first 3. I was like having a hard time kind of tracking with everything, and then kind of went to some other stuff and then came back. Oh, that was a year. I don't think I was done my master's degree yet. So I was like, I got to take a break from this for a bit. Anyway, came back after seeing the movie. I was like, I need to get through and see like where this guy brings all this stuff. And for those of you who don't know, I love Dune. I loved Dune when I was a kid. It was the crazy 80s movie that when you watch now is like pretty whack. A for effort, execution, a little bit lacking. And so anyway, but I loved it. One of my email addresses was literally muad'Dib at blah, 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 blah. And I heard, a couple years ago, Denis Villeneuve is going to be making the Dune movie. And I was like, oh my gosh. Saw the first one. I was like, oh my gosh. Couldn't wait for the second one. Saw the second one. Absolutely loved it. Saw it 3 times in theaters. And then I was like, I got to see where Frank Herbert brings this universe. Like, I know where the first 3 books go. I know what he does with Paul Atreides. I know what he does with his kids and other people in the universe. And I was like, I need to see where the rest of this goes. So I pushed through. I reread the first book, read the second one, Dune Messiah. They'll be making a movie. I should warn. I should have warned already. I'll warn in the intro. Spoiler alert. I'm going to be talking about things from the Dune universe that might, I don't know, spoil stuff for you if you're going to go and read the books. Maybe go read the books, come back to this podcast, because I'm going to talk about all 6 of them. Now, so spoiler alert. I'm giving you time to get your phone out, hit pause or whatever. Anyway, so I watched the movie and I was like, I got to see where Frank brings this whole story. And I reread the first one, combo, audio, and regular, and then went to Dune Messiah. Dune Messiah is a pretty short book, and it's a total different pace from the first one. The first one has all of these things, all this backstory that he never even wrote about kind of comes to a head with Paul Atreides being Muad'Dib, the Kwisatz Haderach. And then the problem is Frank wrote that book. Everyone read it. And they're like, oh my gosh, I love Paul Atreides. And he was like, no, that's not the point of this. Like, his point is that it's really, you have to be really careful about charismatic leaders. And it was like a warning. It was a warning. I think he said, there's an interview where Frank Herbert says, he said, charismatic leaders should come with a warning on their forehead, maybe hazardous to your health. Because he was a really big proponent against, because charismatic leaders, you don't know, charismatic leaders can manipulate you really bad. And he basically becomes this Muad'Dib, Kwisatz Haderach. He fulfills a couple different prophecies and essentially goes on to launch a holy war across the universe to kill, I think, trillions of people, to bring the whole universe under his dominion using the Fremen. Anyway, so you get to the end of the first one. He fulfills it. He becomes emperor of the universe. You get to the second book, 10 years in the future, and they've killed all these people, and he's trying to like rectify and establish his power in a more firm way. You see more from Princess Irulan, who he marries at the end of the first book, and his relationship with Chani, there's different pronunciations, who he loves, but he has to be married to the princess, to like have the, the connection from the houses and everything. And he won't have a kid with Irulan, but he wants to have a kid with Chani and can't. And it turns out Irulan was feeding Chani like something to prevent her from getting pregnant. Anyway, and then you get this kind of like backdoor thing with some of the other forces at play, like the Bene Gesserit sisters and other people that want to get rid of Paul, because he's literally, like, before you kind of had all of these powers competing and using each other almost for each other's benefit, but also to like further their own agenda. And then what happened when Paul came in is it was just too dominant of a force. Like, he had the ability to foresight and look into the future. And then he had the fighting force, the Fremen, which just literally dummied anyone else across the universe. That they all lost all of their power. They had some micro power within their like little areas, but it was basically because Paul just like let them, because that's how dominant a force it was. And anyway, you get through the first book. They work in some new he worked in some new characters, some new like types of characters, like the Bene Talaxu. I don't know why the word Bene is used with multiple different types of people. And what they do is they bring Duncan Idaho back from the dead in the form of a Gola, which is like resurrected flesh, but has none of the memories of the previous living person. Anyway, you get through the book, and there's kind of like a couple of main things that happen are Paul has kids with Chani. He has twins. His connection with his twins help him to defeat this Bene Talaxu dude. And then he's just like so sick of being emperor and all the chaos and stuff he's caused that he pieces out he has these kids. He pieces out to his desert and leaves his sister and mom to raise his two kids. And Chani dies. Yeah. Which was like genuinely pretty sad. There's this one scene which is really cool because he has his kids, and his kids were born with, it wasn't like a special connection to him, but they were born, I think they were born as basically like Reverend Mothers, or what he is to an extent. And there's like a nuclear device that goes off at one point in the book called it's called like an Earthbreaker or something, and it blinds Paul, and then he has to use his foresight to like walk around and see everything. So he's totally blind, but he can still see because he has this like impeccable foresight where he knows exactly what's happening in his brain. And he gets to this point where the Sidetail character is like, like, I have your kids. Like, I win. I'm going to kill your kids if you don't do what I want you to do. and then he was able to tap into the vision from his son and use it to like very quickly like kill Scytale and save his kids. Meantime, his sister has like grown up. She falls in love with this Duncan, Idaho clone thingy, Gola. And at the end of the book, Paul pieces out and starts talking about this golden path. Oh, he heads out because he knows if he stays, it's going to like empower this golden path, which will be more of a firm rule over humanity. And he's like, that's too much terror, too much hardship, and it puts humanity like under someone's thumb too much. So he's like, I'm just gonna go out to the desert. So that's Dune Messiah. Basically, you get the Children of Dune, and this is like the trilogy. Like the first book basically finishes with these 3 books. Children of Dune. You have Leto Atreides, which is one of Paul's twins, and Ganima, which is another twin, which they have like a pretty cool connection. And so then you have the twins on Arrakis, and you have Paul's sister. Can't even think of her name right now, Aliyah. And then there's another family on another planet. The emperor that Paul took over from in the first book, his kids, basically his family, like wanted again try to get. It's just like there's always different families and groups trying to get this power back from the Atreides and the Fremen. And basically, you go through the book, and it's mostly about Leto Atreides II. He's really Leto Atreides III because in the first book, Paul and Chani had a son, and they named him Leto, and he dies. But then you get to the second book, and they have kids again, and they name him Leto II, but he's really Leto III because he's named. It was like I don't know if he just thought people would notice. I don't know why he didn't really like clear that up more, do that a little differently. But anyway, basically, you get through the third book, and Leto gets even better foresight, I think, because he's born with some measure of foresight from Paul, and he gets more foresight, and he goes and he's like, there's a golden path, and the golden path ensures humanity's existence, but removes all freedom and control and authority to himself. And he basically enters into it by it's pretty interesting. He like falls into the sand, goes under the sand, and merges with baby sandworms. These baby sandworms called sand trout basically like attach to his skin, like kind of piece by piece, and they stretch over, and they give him, essentially they make him a superhuman, and he's extremely fast, extremely strong. And you have this stuff happening with this other family trying to get power back, and they want to get power back by killing these two kids, and then they'll kind of insert themselves in the power vacuum. Aliyah is going crazy. The problem with Aliyah, which you don't really see much in the first book, but they call her abomination because she was born with the powers of a reverend mother. And the hard thing is when you have reverend mothers, you have Bene Gesserit, and then they enter into this process to basically accept all the memories of all the previous women before them in the Bene Gesserit as reverend mothers. So they have centuries and centuries of memories of other women they can tap into as resources to basically inform and advise the political structure, but really they're using the political structure for their own gain. But the problem with Aliyah is her mom was pregnant. She went through the process to become a reverend mother, and that made Aliyah sentient in the womb and full of all these memories that she had nothing to like process them against. And she was born that way. So she was basically born like a fully conscious, fully sentient adult, like a centuries old adult with all of this stuff. But the problem is when you're born that way, what happens is those like memories and ancestors can like, they're like living beings inside of them, and they can come out and they can basically like usurp control of the body from the main person for the typical Reverend Mother, they've developed, years of discipline and actions to keep those things at bay and just utilize them when they need. But the problem for Aaliyah is she was born that way without any of those control measures. And essentially these previous beings end up communicating with her and trying to negotiate with her. Like, hey, if you let me control you for a while, I'll do this for you, for us, whatever. And so the main character that's able to do that from her past, from her genetic past, is the Baron Harkonnen, who died in the first book. And so he basically he kind of comes back as this genetic memory that's able to control Aaliyah. But the problem is with Aaliyah doing that is she is unable to govern effectively and becomes a super, I mean, you could say this about maybe anyone with the amount of power that she had with where she was at. But by giving that over to the Baron Harkonnen, it was just like devastating and damaging for everyone. It's like all of her decisions all of a sudden were not ever made with like clear intent. They were made with subjective intent for the Baron's like own purpose. Anyway, and the twins are able to recognize, I think because of how they were born in a way that they didn't have all of those things. They had like super high genetic powers because they were Paul's son, but they weren't born from a Reverend Mother who became Reverend Mother when she had them. And so they're like able to control like everything that's going on for them to a much stronger degree than Aaliyah. And they're trying everything they can to avoid going through the Reverend Mother process because because Leto has enough foresight and power to know if I enter that, it basically is like this, it's terrible purpose. They use this term often regarding it because it removes all, it ensures humanity's existence by removing all freedom, all power, and all decisions for all humanity. And essentially he becomes one with the sand trout, becomes uber powerful, and then he merges with sand trout, and then I think he goes through like the same Reverend Mother process that Paul went through, and he tries everything he can to avoid it, but basically he can't. And so he becomes this super being. And you find out at the end of the book, he's going to live for thousands of years in this form. And his sister marries one of the dudes who's trying to kill him to kind of close that gap of that family heritage. And Aaliyah basically dies by the end of the book. Duncan dies. Paul comes back briefly, but then this blind man, they keep calling him a preacher, and he'll come into the city and declare things and then leave. And the book ends. I kind of got there the first time and I was like, this is pretty weird. Like it's not like, I think Frank Herbert, to credit him, he is really trying to make a lot of full philosophical and ideological points with his books and characters. It's not necessarily about like, hey, I want this to be, I'm going to use characters and peoples and themes to craft a great readable story for people. I think he uses like a sci-fi background and characters and groups of people to get ideas across. Like, I think if maybe, I know there's like different types of writing, but if you were going to write in order to, I guess you have to decide what the purpose of your writing is, and then with that you can form your story. And I will say I read another sci-fi book recently called Rendezvous with Rama, and I think that's from the 70s. It's by Arthur C. Clarke, the dude that wrote the book The 2001 Space Odyssey is based off. And Frank Herbert's writing style from around the same time, way better. No offense, Arthur C. Clarke. I don't even know if the guy's alive, but Frank Herbert was way more readable for sure. And so that was a point where I was like, hey, I haven't got past this before. I'm going to now. And the next book, so it goes Dune Messiah, Children of Dune. That's the first trilogy. God Emperor of Dune, because Leto the second becomes God Emperor, and you get to the next book. It's 3,500 years in the future, so everyone you know is gone. the Jessica's gone. Aaliyah's, well, she's already gone. Ganima's gone. Everyone's gone from the first trilogy. And he's basically this like thousands of year old, super like basically invincible being that knows everything. And it is such a different book. Like Arrakis has been terraformed to not be a planet of sand. They were already terraforming it in the first 3 books, basically to like make it more livable, habitable, and then to decrease the supply of spice, which increases demand and just gives them more power with the amount of spice they have. And because there's other houses have like stored up spice, and so the less that there is, the more valuable it is across the universe. And basically you get to God Emperor Dune, and it's like the whole planet Arrakis is terraformed to be more like Earth. And Leto has 1 man, 2 men that work for him. And he's basically over the centuries. I don't understand why, but he has just like, he goes from one Duncan, Idaho Gola to the next. And so there's just this long line of Duncan, Idahos that work for him. You start the book. This Duncan wants to kill him and hates him. So they have a fight. Duncan dies. And then a new Duncan comes, and you watch him interact with Duncan, Idaho for like the first time, like from Duncan's perspective. And basically what happens for Duncan is he died in the first book, and then he wakes up. Oh, yeah, he wakes up because they figure out how to like bring back his previous memories. And he's like, the last thing I remember is being killed by the Sardaukar, and now I'm here with this giant worm being thing. And the Leto II, his like army is all women called fish speakers, because like men can't be trusted and women are they're like way better soldiers. He like lists all these reasons. It's actually like a remarkably philosophical book. It's from the perspective of like a dictator that I don't think you have to determine, is this guy good or bad? The point isn't like, is Leto II good or bad? The point of Leto is like to learn about how dictators think, and then you can make like a moral judgment based on that. And so his number 2 guy, Mineo, is like his genetic descendant. Mineo's daughter is trying to overthrow Leto II. And basically you get through this whole book, and it's like pretty wild. They just go, there's like all this stuff. There's not a lot happening. Oh, and then Leto wants to marry like a being crafted by the Bene Talaxu. They like created this being to this woman to seduce him, and he knows that they did, but then he's like engaging with it anyway. It's kind of weird. And basically he's super invincible. Like nothing can hurt him. He goes into these blood rages where he just like murders everyone around him. Cause I guess the being merged with a sand trout, with the sandworms, that like primal animal instinct can kind of take over, and he'll just like kill everyone that's around him. So it's so interesting. It was like, I would say like it was a very fun book to read from the sense of, it's just so different from the first 3. There's no sand. There's no desert. It's like, it's kind of like this random aside from the first 3, right? Like there's no Paul. And then you get through the book, and they realize that water is super bad for him. It's so weird. Like you think somebody would have tried that. And he's getting ready to marry this person that's been created for him. And then they attack him on a bridge, and he falls into a river and essentially just falls apart and dies. And the thing, to his credit, is he like knew it was going to happen, and he let it happen because it was supposed to. All part of this golden path foresight. And at the time, what he's done with humanity is humanity across the universe is essentially just like he's reversed them back to no technology. Like all humanity live in mud huts basically. And so he's like, where people like this, like Mineo's daughter was calling him out, like, look how awful this is. And he's like, yeah, but they're alive. Like they wouldn't have made it here. Humanity would have stopped without, like, before now if I hadn't done this. I had to do this to ensure our existence. And then it's that kind of conflict of like freedom, non-freedom, like what is like the purpose or what is that balance? Like you give someone total freedom, they use it to destroy their own life. Was that morally good or bad? And he's not really saying, like Frank Herbert's not really saying, he just is writing about it. Anyway, it's like very fun. I would encourage anyone, if you like, I want to read the Dune books, just for sure get through the first 4. It is like really enjoyable. I think the 4th one might be my favorite because it's just such a pattern interruption. And I think when I read about it, Frank Herbert, like philosophically, I believe his son said he saw himself in Leto II in super warm form. Super worm form. Holy! Okay. And anyway, and so I think what's fun to read it is you feel like you're getting an exact snapshot into Frank Herbert's mind where you don't necessarily get that with other characters. And so I think that's what makes it like funner to read. And some of the banter back and forth, like one thing, I made a whole podcast about it. He's telling Mineo, I like you, Mineo. And he's like, I'm a good manager. He's like, what makes a good manager? And Mineo says, makes good decisions. And Leto says, no. He says, an effective manager is one that makes quick decisions. He said, he's like a bad manager. Instead of making a decision, will make committees and say we have to do research and does everything they can except to actually make a decision. He said an effective manager makes a decision, and then Mineo says good decisions, and he says they can usually be they can usually be made to work, but because they make decisions, if they make a bad decision, they can go back and adjust it before anything like really bad happens. He's like, so I like you, Mineo. And that really hits me with like assertiveness and how to move organizations forward. We like belabor to make the right decision when often we have enough information to make a decision that's there anyway. Get through it. And then the next 2 books, Heretics of Dune, Chapter House Dune, start of a new trilogy. And the problem is Frank Herbert died after the 2nd book. He didn't finish the trilogy. So you read them and they're slow. They're creating new characters. He kills off some of the characters he's creating. If it really focuses on the Bene Gesserit, the lineage of Leto, and they refer to, what do they call him? The heretic. And they are trying to just build their own livelihood back up. But from what happened after Leto died is there was a scattering. Humanity went farther into the cosmos than ever before. And there's this new super woman cult called Honored Matres. I don't know how to even say it. And they basically are coming, and you spend these 2 books trying to understand where the Bene Gesserit are at now, understanding what they have to do in the future, understanding who these Honored Matres are, where'd they come from, because then they figure out they must be running from something. You kind of get there. There is a fight at the end of the 2nd book, but it's over really quick. And then it's like, what are we going to do now? And it just kind of ends. And I'm really summarizing these 2 books quick because I didn't feel like there's like a lot to say about them. I didn't really enjoy them. They weren't super enjoyable. They're like decently. There's a couple characters I liked, their way of thinking that I liked, but the action was just so slow. There's so much dialogue, so much narration. Like someone will just be looking at a landscape and it's 3 pages of what they're thinking about, which is cool, but also just slow. And the fact that there was no conclusion from Frank really feels something like wanting. And then his son worked with another guy to finish that story arc out. So they wrote 2 more books because they couldn't do it in just 1 book. And when I looked at the synopsis of the next book, I was like, because because apparently they had notes from Frank and they knew what he wanted to do. And it just had to be done. Like the story just had to be finished. And I was like, man, is that what Frank was getting at? He kind of was. You can see, like, basically what happens is the Beni Talaxu with Golas keep recreating themselves. So Scytale, who died in the second book, turns out he's still around as a Gola, and he has like a necklace because they're killing all of the Beni Talaxu, and face dancers they call them because they can change their shape like at any moment. And he has this like vial around his neck and has genetic material from like Paul, Jessica, Dr. Yui, apparently. And they resurrect all these characters in the next two books as Golas, which I was just like there's times where I like that, where, you know, like who doesn't like a movie where someone, like it's a Marvel movie and a character, it's like the Spider-Man movie. They had Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield come in from years since they last played their Spider-Man. Like there are times I really like that. But when I saw it, I was like, is that just the point he was getting at? Because he didn't know like the next step to go? It just felt redundant, I guess. You know, maybe that's the whole point of the Golas, and he was planning to set that up from the beginning. I guess like where I struggle sometimes is you can have two stories. You can have one story, but the intent can be very different. You can have if your story is written because you planned it that way from the start. And I'm like, look, stories change, scripts change, books change as they're writing them. They're trying to figure it out. When they write the first one, they don't have everything figured out. That's fine. But you can just tell when you get later into a series and it's like they didn't have this figured out and they're just like improving. It's not super enjoyable as a reader because I think, yeah, it just leaves you like wanting a lot. And I think that's what I felt the last two books as I got through them to get through them. And I thought like, I didn't really super enjoy these. I have the books. I bought them. I don't know if I'll read them. It just feels like, I don't know, just feels like a lot. So here I'm just like belaboring the fact that I did this. So look, I'm super happy I did this. I think if you're interested in Dune and you want to read the books, for sure read the first one, for sure. Because I think just to see like, I think it is like really cool to see where this story came from. But read the first 4 if you want to read more. And the next 2, it's like, yeah, if you want to, if you're digging it, you like the story, like the writing type, keep going. Like you don't have any other books on the docket right now, keep going. But I think if you stop after God Emperor of Dune is also okay. So, and then Frank Herbert's son, Brian, went on to write, you know, him and this dude have written more auxiliary books around this main storyline in Dune, which I haven't got to. It's like a lot. When there's like dozens of books in a series, I'm kind of like, I don't have that much time. I don't read that fast. But anyway, so that's like the Dune series. I thought it was like pretty fun. I love reading books that challenge my way of thinking, that give me new ways of looking at things, that give me into the mind of different people. And yeah, I really like that for Dune. I think also as a Christian, like the use of messianic symbolism and figures, I think is really cool. It's not really cool. It's like really impactful and kind of just gets me thinking a lot more, which I really like. And yeah, so if you like and they're making another movie, they just came out with a series. I haven't watched the series yet. But yeah, I would say like read the book, read the first 4. If you don't like it, you know, stop at any time. If you get to the 4th one, you don't like it, don't read the next 2. If you're digging it, like keep going. The next 2 focus like way more. They give like way more height to women in power, and it's really women that are in charge. And if that really interests you, like you can keep reading and maybe find it really interesting. I just wish it was like done a little bit differently, I guess. But anyway, I mean, the guy's gone. You can't really go back and redo anything. And I'll probably get to the next 2 at some point, but I just want to get Frank's done because I'm like, I never knew where the universe goes. Like, where's this story arc of Muad'Dib, the Kwisatz Haderach go? And it just kind of turns out it kind of basically stops after the 3rd one, mostly after the 4th one for sure. And then it's just like a total new, it's like It like kind of feels like 6 books, and then it kind of feels like 4 and 2, but it's really like 4 and then 2. Like they're not really that connected linearly, except timeline. Anyway, hope you guys enjoy this. Thanks for checking it out, and let me know what you think of the Dune books. Peace.